God, thank you so much for giving us this time together. There are a lot of needs out there. Health needs, because we know Velma is dealing with the fall. They may not even know what they're going to do yet. But be with her, give her comfort. And Rick's mom and co-workers and friends who are dealing with health issues and financial stress. Help them not to be overwhelmed. Enable them to just figure out what they can do, and then give them the strength and encouragement to do it. We ask this in the name of Christ. Amen. Okay, we're not going to. This will be relatively short.
Oh.
Yeah, which is
a lot of scripture.
Which is kind of it's not too much, and I think there's a major break after 1927. I mean, now he's going to Jerusalem, and so that's clearly a new section, and this is a little one. So we'll focus a bit on that now. Just as a review, what are some of the things we've talked about in the first part of the Gospel of Luke that establishes who Jesus is as a Christ? What were some of the stories that Luke included? Right from the beginning, just sort of the headlines. And if you want to look in your Bible, you certainly can. Thumb through it from the beginning. What are some of the stories that he had?
The guy down through the roof.
Okay.
The woman touched the hem of his.
So we got, and that's really
all
interesting.
All kinds of miracles.
The miracles, especially the guy going through the roof, that sets us up for something else. What occurs? So there are miracles that are being performed, shows he has power and authority, right? And that's what we see when. Sort of culminates when Peter says, "You are the Christ of God," or God's Christ, or God's Messiah. So we've got all these things that show his power, which healings are part of it. What else? What else is going on that displays his authority?
How he's going to make the less be more important.
Okay, now that's
be less.
That's something else we've got here. So we've got his teaching. And so let's look at his authority. We've got healing. He heals. What else does he do that demonstrates power and authority? In that first half of the gospel, what else does he do?
He feeds the 5,000. The Holy Spirit.
Okay, well, not Holy Spirit, because I'm going
unclean spirits.
Unclean spirits. Okay, that's. So he casts out unclean spirits, right? Shows his authority.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is when he casts out unclean spirits, what about those unclean spirits? What do they know?
They know.
They know who he is. Okay, so he's healing folks. He's casting out demons. What else is he doing to show authority?
Taking on the Pharisees.
Well, he takes on the Pharisees. Hold that just for a minute. Walks on water. Still storms, right? Feeds 5,000, all of which are demonstrating his authority. So we've got Jesus doing that, showing what it means to be the Christ, right? In that first half, culminating in Peter's confession. Now we've got other things, and Paula, you mentioned, we've got a theme that Luke introduces, and that's really important, not only for Jesus, but even pre-Jesus. And that's what? What does Jesus tell us that we can expect to see?
A reversal.
A reversal. The high are going to be low, the low are going to be high. So, and we've seen that in his interactions with people, right? Mm-hmm. Because if we are reading a story that deals with tax collectors and sinners, we've got a pretty good idea how that story is going to resolve itself, right? Mm-hmm. Who's going to be the hero of the story? Tax collectors and sinners.
Right.
If we see rich person, that rich person is going to be brought down, because that's the pattern that Jesus has established, right? Okay, so we've got that going on. We've got certain events happening. The birth, which was miraculous birth. We got the relationship with John the Baptist. We got calling the disciples, which become important because those disciples are going to carry on. They're the ones that are going to carry on after Jesus is gone. Now, as Luke has done this, and remember Luke is shaping this story, we've got certain groups. And he kind of deals with the groups not as individuals, but he deals with them as sharing characteristics. They may have spokespeople, but they all have the same. Who are the groups that Luke deals with? Consistent. Okay, we got Pharisees. And they're always, it's seldom just Pharisees. They are the scribes and the Pharisees. The scribes and the Pharisees. And the scribes were the ones that wrote, made the copies, and the Pharisees are the ones that are guided by it. And what's the issue? What seems to be in Luke the issue with the scribes and the Pharisees? As Luke writes his story,
they're against Jesus.
Okay, they're against Jesus. And do you remember why they're against it?
Those are very law-abiding.
Well, they're very law-abiding. Therefore, when Jesus breaks the law, that becomes an issue for the Pharisees. Mm-hmm. And yet, Jesus in Luke also calls the Pharisees hypocrites. We'll call them hypocrites because they're concerned about little laws, but not big laws. Do you remember, though, what caused the Pharisees to make the decision that they're going to get rid of Jesus? Yes, the guy with the withered hand. Okay.
On the Sabbath.
Heals them on the Sabbath. And as he frames it, what does Jesus say that he's doing on the Sabbath when he heals it?
He's doing good.
He's doing good. And when he does good, that's when the Pharisees say, we got to kill him. Luke is shaping the story. So we have this incredibly negative view of Pharisees. They're hypocrites. They want to kill Jesus because he's doing good on the Sabbath. That law sort of is more important than actually helping people. So they are the wearing the black hats, right? What's some other groups? Because we got two other groups going
Sinners.
on. Okay, we got sin. Now in that big group, maybe we'll say we got three more groups because we got sinners. And what are the sinners? And sinners are always associated with what other people? When Luke talks about sinners, it's almost always like scribes and Pharisees. You've got sinners and tax collectors, sinners and tax collectors, and they're together. And what's going on with the sinners and the tax collectors?
No, Jesus is hanging out with them.
Okay, Jesus hangs out with them. They're kind of the outsiders that are going to be brought in. They're going to be brought in. Okay, so we've got sinners and tax collectors. We've got scribes and Pharisees. Who else do we have out there?
Disciples.
We got disciples. And in that inner group of disciples, what does Luke call that inner circle? Apostles. And how many apostles? 12. But you got other disciples that are around them. Now, who are the disciples? If the scribes and the Pharisees are the antagonists, or they're the villains, and the sinners are the ones that change, what's going on with the disciples?
They're following and leaving their things behind.
They're following, they're leaving their stuff behind. They've been called.
They're learning.
Not
very well, though. They're kind of stupid if you think about it.
They don't
get anything.
They don't pick up a lot. And what we're looking at today, they're going to miss something else. And so they're the ones that are getting special learning, right? Because he'll give sometimes he'll give a parable and then explain it to the disciples. In fact, in the second part, so far in Luke, second part of Luke, Jesus has been doing what for his disciples? Since Peter said, "You are the Christ of God," what has Jesus started to do after that point?
He's empowering them to do it themselves.
That's right. He's empowering them to do it themselves because he told them what's going to happen to it.
He's not going to be there.
Yeah, we're going to go to Jerusalem, and what's going to happen to me in Jerusalem?
I'm going to die.
Crucified.
I'm going to be crucified. I'm going to die. And I'm going to be raised. And even after, so you say crucified, raised. Well, that's not too bad. Because he's going to crucify and raise. And then he says, I'm going to leave. Because Luke has an ascension that we don't have in the other Gospels. So Jesus is going to be gone. And so therefore he's preparing disciples. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Just a minute. So the disciples are that. They don't always get it. But they're following that inner group of the apostles. They're going to be really important later. Because for Luke, There are 12 apostles, only 12, not 13, not 11, got to be 12. And when they lose one, and who are they going to lose at the end of the story?
Judas.
They're going to lose Judas. One of the first things they do in Acts after Jesus goes is they find another one. They find a 12. And it's interesting, they pick them by drawing straws, Simeon and Matthias. They decide who's going to be the next apostle by drawing straws, because you got to have 12. For the 12 tribes of Israel, you need 12 apostles. So that's what the apostles are really important. So we've got these three groups, but we got another group that's out there. And what's that final group that's out there?
Crowds.
You got the crowds, the aklos. And the crowds, what's going on with the crowds?
They just watching.
They are just, that's it. And they are just watching.
They want to see how this is going to all pan out.
They like the miracles. They really like the miracles. Because we've seen people healed. And the people that are healing, that have been healed, often healing is one thing, physical healing is one thing, but and Jesus does that, what's though the next step? This is wholeness. And the people who are made whole, what do they do that the people who are healed, what do they have that the people who are just healed may not have?
Spiritual.
Okay, they're spiritual. They have faith. Mm-hmm. And that's what he'll say. He'll say it again today, about faith doing this. So we've got all of this going on. We got Jesus preparing the disciples on his trip to Jerusalem, because he's told us that he's going to die in Jerusalem. What are some of the topics that he's been preparing the disciples for as he gets them ready for life after Jesus? What are some of the topics he's dealt with that he would expect them to face?
I mean, like, are you talking about like the lost and being found? Or are you talking about the rich and
that they will suffer.
Well, okay, he's sort of prepared them. Don't expect life to be easy. You're gonna suffer. And remember, Luke is writing this to a church, end of the first century, starting to face persecution, really discouraged. Jesus is preparing disciples. As he does it in the story, it doesn't make any sense, because the disciples have absolutely no idea what the world's going to be like after Jesus is gone. But who does know? Luke's church. And what life is without Jesus. The disciples in the story don't, because Jesus is always there. But the people later. So he's prepared. Life is going to be tough. You're going to run into hypocrites. Don't expect people to accept you, everybody to accept, but some people will. He's talked a lot about material possessions, right? Mm-hmm. What do you do with material possessions?
Don't have them.
Yeah, don't view them as your source of security.
Go to someone's house. If they welcome you, stay as long as you can. If not, move on.
Okay, so if we want to understand what it means to be a disciple, we can read what Jesus talks about as he's moving to Jerusalem. Okay, now, so that's what we've looked at so far. If we're in chapter 18, verse 31 in Luke, what does it say what's going on in verse 31 of chapter 18, verse 31?
About his death.
Okay.
It tells about his...
Jesus starts talking about his death. Well, how does he set this up? Because remember, we want to pay attention to the people to whom he's talking, right? Because if he's talking to disciples, who's he talking to? Us, right? So when he says things to disciples, we want to listen, because that's something to us. When he's talking to scribes and Pharisees, he's showing us something about the opposition. But this may not be a lesson directly for us. It's to those who are against him, right? So who's he talking to in verse 31? Who's his audience?
The apostles.
He's talking to the 12 apostles. So this is to the inner group.
Circle, yeah.
The inner circle. The ones right on the inside. And what does he say? Which is important, because that means these are things we want to know. What does he say to them?
He tells them about what they're gonna do to him
Where?
in Jerusalem.
Right at the beginning.
Whatever they've written is gonna take place, is
Okay.
gonna happen.
Now remember, through this whole trip, from the time Peter makes his confession to here, there have been places where Luke says he looked towards Jerusalem. He headed to Jerusalem, on his way to Jerusalem. He's used Jerusalem sort of as a marker to divide it. Now he's doing it again. Only this time Jesus is saying about what's going to happen to him in Jerusalem and what's going to happen to him in Jerusalem.
He's gonna be killed.
He's going to be killed and
It's gonna be flogged.
he's going to be detailed, right? He's going to be handed over to Gentiles. He's going to be mocked.
Spat upon.
Okay, and flogged.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen to him?
He'll be killed.
He's going to be killed, and the third day he's going to rise. Okay, all of which is happening where? In Jerusalem. Now remember, in Luke, that's a big deal, that everything happens in Jerusalem. He doesn't go to a mountain in Galilee. In Luke, everything is going to be in and around Jerusalem. Okay, now, he explains that. What's the response in this inner group?
They didn't understand.
They didn't understand.
Well, it said, oh, I don't know where it's at. It said
It was
the
hidden
meaning- it
from
was
them.
hidden from them. I don't know where I read that.
Yeah.
Yes, it says right there, it was hidden from them.
What, like, that's what I mean. They're kind of, they don't pick up, or why is it hidden from them?
Now,
And he tells them, what's that?
Now see, this is interesting, because who is writing that it's hidden from them?
Luke.
Luke is writing. Luke is writing. Now remember, he's writing this to a church, right? Why might he write to the church that Jesus says this, but in this inner group, they didn't pick up because it was hidden from them? Why might that be kind of important? Or what might Luke be doing here in a very subtle way for his audience? By telling his audience, these 12, this inner group, they didn't get it. In fact, it was hidden from them. Do the people in Luke's church know that Jesus is going to go to Jerusalem?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do they know he's going to be turned over to
They know.
flogged,
Yeah,
crucified?
told
They know that, right?
Yeah.
They understand that. The people in this inner circle, they don't.
They don't.
Which is almost like Luke is, well, not almost. I think this is exactly what he's doing. He's telling his church people, you may not realize it, but you actually know more than this inner group. One of the things that happens now, I think happened then, and can be very discouraging, a sign of discouragement is, if I had just been there, if I had been with him, then I'd have really understood, how lucky those apostles were to be with him. Luke is saying what?
They
Not
saw
really,
it.
because
They weren't that lucky because they didn't get it. But you, 60 years later, you do understand. I don't think it's a major thing, but it's a little boost, to their ego and to a discouraged church. That may be what they want to hear. Instead of hearing about how wonderful the apostles were and how smart they were and how great everything, this is a little bit of encouragement, that you're okay. You know things that they don't know. And why wouldn't the apostles understand what he's saying? Why would Luke's church know it and why would we know it and they miss it?
They were too close to him.
They were
and
too
They were
clo-
in denial, maybe, that
Well-
he was actually going to die
Well, that's
and
it.
leave them.
They're on the wrong side of the cross, right? He's talking about his death, and he hasn't done it yet, right? So they can't understand the significance yet because they're still on the wrong side of the cross. That'll change. That'll change after the crucifixion. Okay, so this is a big shift. Jesus is we know he's almost to Jerusalem, because what place is mentioned in verse 35?
Jericho.
Okay, he's in Jericho, and Jericho is really close. He's been traveling to Jerusalem. He's getting really, really close to Jerusalem. Okay, and all of this is going to happen. What occurs in Jericho, as he's in
The
Jericho.
blind man.
Okay, you've got a blind man. Now, we see this in Mark, only he's given a name, Bartimaeus, in Mark. Blind Bartimaeus. In Matthew, there are two blind people. In Luke, we've just got an unnamed blind person, right? And what is this blind person doing?
Yelling out to Jesus.
Okay, yelling after
Jesus
Jesus.
of Nazareth.
And what, as Jesus is passing by, what is he shouting at Jesus?
Jesus of Nazareth.
Okay, says Jesus of Nazareth is passing by, and then what does he call him?
Jesus, son of David.
Okay, Jesus, son of David. Now, that's kind of I think that's important because what's going to occur in just a chapter? What's just about to occur? What is Jesus going to do? Healing's going to occur, but in the story, what is Jesus going to do in the next chapter or so? We'll talk about next week. That's going to start his time in Jerusalem. What's he going to do to get in Jerusalem? What do we call it when he enters Jerusalem? Yeah, it's Palm Sunday. He's going to enter on that day, right? And what are the crowds going to be yelling?
Hosanna.
Yeah, Hosanna and recognizing King, right? So the crowds are going to end up saying the same thing that who's saying here? That the blind man is saying. So we've got sort of an introduction, a foretaste to what's going to happen in just a little bit. Jesus is really, really close to Jerusalem. Now, what do his followers, Jesus' followers, what do they do? Try to do? What do they try to do?
Shoo him off.
They try to shoo him off. They try to get him to shut up because they want him to be quiet, right? Okay? But the more they try to get him quiet, the louder he gets. Okay.
Jesus orders them to bring him to him.
Yeah, and this is what's going to happen to Jesus in just a little bit when he goes into Jerusalem. In fact, there's going to be a whole deal with the scribes and the Pharisees that will tell Jesus, get the crowds quiet. Get the crowds quiet. It's going to be the same sort of thing in just a little bit. Now, Jesus does what? What does he do? What does he ask this guy to
Bring
do?
him to him.
Okay, bring the guy to me. And the guy says to Jesus, what?
He wants to see.
Wants to see again. And what does Jesus say?
Look and you shall see.
Okay, so the guy gets
Healed.
gets his sight back.
Because his faith saved.
Yeah, and then faith saved. So we got both of those. And remember, save is made whole. So we got both of those going. So physically he's healed and spiritually he's healed. Now, it's kind of interesting that the guy's problem isn't a withered hand, right? Because we've had that. It isn't that he's lame, because we've had that. It's not that he's got blood, an issue of blood, because we've had that. Or leprosy. We've had that. His problem is that he can't see, and he's given his sight back. Now, or given sight. Symbolically, why might it be significant as Jesus is getting ready to enter Jerusalem that the healing as he's entering it is restoring the sight of a person?
Because some people are blind to what's happening
Okay.
right now.
Some people are blind. In fact, he just said that his
Just like
apostles don't know what's going on. In a sense, they're blind. Who else in the story is blind? Pharisees, scribes and Pharisees are blind. This guy, as Jesus is getting ready to enter Jerusalem, now he can see. Yes, a parallel. Now he's kind of enlightened. Now he can see. Now, if this is right, we might expect it to happen again, right? That might happen again. Okay, so he's healed this person who can now see, right? He's in Jericho. What happens in Jericho? So he's healed this guy. What happens else? What else happens in Jericho? Okay, we got Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus is what? Is a wee little man. A wee little man was he. Yes. He was a tax collector, and he was short. What else does Luke tell us about it? When Luke describes him, and again, when we read it, we want to look at what Luke tells us, what these writers. Okay, he's a tax collector. Excuse me, he's a tax collector and he's rich.
Because he's cheated.
Well, now that we know he's a tax collector, what is our attitude about tax collectors in Luke? How does Luke? They're fairly good. Tax collectors change. They're on the outside. Now, historically, tax collectors in the first century, Palestine, they were bad people. They were like gangsters. They were bad men. They really were. Because the Romans set up franchises. That's what it was, to collect taxes. And whatever you collected, the Romans didn't want trouble. You hired your own protection. It was your responsibility to raise a certain amount for the Romans. And whatever you raised in addition to that, consider it your commission. Now, of course, you had to be careful, because if you collected too much, then the people would get
In an uproar.
And people in an uproar do what?
Riot.
They riot, right? And if you got people rioting people
Could kill you.
could kill you. If you have a riot, who ultimately has to put the riot down? The Romans do. And for the Romans to put the riot down, it's going to cost them money, right? And rioting people seldom pay their taxes. So if he collects too much and the people riot, then the Romans are going to have to spend money to put the riot down and not collect any, right? So the tax collectors, they weren't stupid people. They had to get as much as they could, but if they pulled too much, then people would stop paying. And the Romans don't get the money, and that's really bad. All the Romans cared about was getting their money, the money they felt due. They didn't, and to keep people calm. Riots cost money. And so tax collectors had to be real careful that they didn't collect too much, because if they did, they pushed the population too far. Okay, but they were really corrupt. Tax collectors were awful. They were awful people in the first century. And he's also, in Luke, tax collectors have been good guys, right? They're the ones that have changed. But he's rich. And what have we seen about rich people in the Gospel of Luke? Woe to the rich. Rich people have not come out ahead. I don't know that you can find one good rich person in Luke to this point. Rich people are the ones that get pulled down. We went through the whole thing with Lazarus and the rich man. And the rich man was in his place primarily because he was rich. So rich has it. So we got a mixed thing here. He's a tax collector and he's also rich. But we want to file that away. Now, so Zacchaeus is there. Now, how is he similar? And think about it. We got this blind guy, right, in Jericho, that is shouting, Son of David, have mercy on me. How is Zacchaeus similar to the blind man? He's trying to see Jesus, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
So short, he has to climb up the tree.
That's right, he can't. So if the blind man is blind, so is Zacchaeus. Both of them are trying to see, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we got these two stories that are really similar. Both of them have to do with vision. The blind man couldn't see because he was blind. Zacchaeus couldn't see because he was small, and the crowd would obstruct his vision. So he had to climb a sycamore tree, right? Because we all know the song. And what does Jesus do when he sees Zacchaeus in the tree? He says, "Come down, Zacchaeus." Yeah, for I'm going to your house today, right? Okay, why is he doing that? Going to his house?
Needs a place to stay.
Yeah, it's not mentioned. There's no mention of why is he going into Zacchaeus' house, right? Although Jesus has tended to hang out with
The
sinners and tax collectors. So going to his house is not a shock. Zacchaeus comes down, happy to greet him. Of course, what's the response?
Of course. What,
Zacchaeus, from Zacchaeus.
Well, not from Zacchaeus, because before we get to Zacchaeus, we have grumbling.
Oh, yeah.
We have
People think
grumbling.
that's all
Now,
that
who would we
he's
expect?
associated.
Yeah, who would we expect to grumble?
The crowds.
Scribes.
Yes.
Scribes
It
and
said
Pharisees.
we'd expect the scribes and the Pharisees to grumble because they're always grumbling, but they're not grumbling here. Who's grumbling here?
The older people.
Everybody. The people are grumbling. Ooh, that may be. We might want to file that away. Because later that may be significant. That right here, all of a sudden, the crowds that were sort of out there, just following around, now the crowds
And it's starting to turn.
sound a little like scribes and Pharisees. A little bit. Okay? That's interesting. Maybe Jesus' prediction that he's going to be handed over
Might be true.
might be true. That the crowds that all, he doesn't use the word crowd, but he says all, that everybody is now grumbling, which means everybody is now shifting, a little shift. So maybe his prediction is true. Zacchaeus comes down to the tree, greets, is all happy. What does Zacchaeus do? And he does this on his own accord, right?
Yeah. He's just happy that Jesus actually recognized
Got
him.
a
Said
light.
that half of everything he had would go to the poor.
Mm-hmm.
And if he defrauded anyone, he would
Repay 4 times.
4 times. Now, experiencing deja vu all over again. Man, we just had a story about giving stuff away, right? What was the story we just had about giving away your property to the poor? You remember that? We talked about it last week. What story did, only the situation was very different. Remember the story?
Was a rich man. and
The rich young man.
But not the
The
one
rich
with
ruler.
Lazarus.
What's that?
Not the one with Lazarus stuff.
No, not the parable of Lazarus and the rich, but what we do have, and remember the situation with the rich ruler? Comes to Jesus, wants to know how to inherit eternal life, do everything you're supposed to. He says there must be something else. Jesus says,
so long could you make the poor.
right. And that's Jesus. He kind of initiates the contact, the rich person. And how does he leave? When Jesus says, he leaves sad because
He's very rich.
he's very rich. Now remember, I told you one of the things that's different with the rich person, the same story in the other Gospels, is in the other 2 Gospels, in Matthew and Mark, this rich young person, and he's young in Matthew, is sympathetic. In both of the stories in Matthew and Mark, it says Jesus felt sorry for it. Jesus felt sorry for it, and then tells him this, and then he leaves. But there's a sense, when we read it, there's a sense that we should feel a little bit of sympathy for this guy, little sympathy for the rich guy who just can't give up everything he has and follow. Because Jesus feels sympathy towards it. We don't have that in Luke. Luke takes that little piece out, that Jesus feels sympathy for him. So this rich guy doesn't deserve our sympathy. This story of Zacchaeus is found only in Luke. And so I think these 2 stories Luke intends to hold together. Because Zacchaeus does what that the rich man won't do.
Give it away.
He gives it away. And he gives half, doesn't give it all, but he gives half, and he gives it to the poor, and
he's going to repay.
he's going to repay those he's defrauded. Okay.
He might not have much left.
Something that the rich person
Didn't want to do.
did not do. So standing, and remember, he was a rich ruler. So a person that had authority. And here we have a tax collector ends up doing something that this rich person can't do or won't do. You know. And what does Jesus say in response?
Salvation has come to this house.
Salvation has come to this house. Okay. And picks up, you know, something he's talked about earlier. The Son of Man has come to do what?
Save the lost.
Seek out and save the lost. Now, how is this story similar to the story of the blind man? What are the parallels? We got a parallel between this story and the rich ruler, right? Because this tax collector, who is also rich, does something that ruler won't do. How is this parallel? What's the connection between this story and the blind man?
The blind man could
The blind
see,
man can see
physically, and Zacchaeus can see
spiritually. Yeah, so we've got this vision, and in both stories, it ends with salvation, wholeness, right? Mm-hmm. Both of them experience, both in a sense receive sight, right?
Right.
Both of them receive
In different
wholeness
ways.
in different ways. But both of them are sort of healed, right? Okay. Now, related to what's happened, because all of this is together, he's moving to Jerusalem, and notice in verse 11, as they're listening to this going on, what does Jesus tell them?
another parable.
He tells them a parable, and Luke tells us the reason he's giving them this parable is why is he telling them this parable now?
Jerusalem, and because they suppose
Okay.
that the
He
kingdom
is-
of God was
Time's
to
right.
appear immediately.
He is almost in Jerusalem. In fact, this is going to be his last conversation before he gets into the city. He tells them a parable. And this is a parable we see in the other two Gospels. Don't see it in John. We'll see it in Matthew and Mark, but in a different place, earlier. Parable. What's the parable about? And some of the details are a little different.
The rich man that gave his servants.
You got a noble person, right? How is it set up?
He went away to a distant country.
Okay, why does he go into a distant country?
To get royal power.
Okay, he's going to have royal power, right? He's going to acquire royal power. And who does he have in front of him?
Slaves.
He has slaves. How many of them?
10.
10. And what does he do with the 10 slaves?
Gives them each 10 pounds.
Okay, he gives them 10 pounds or a certain amount of gold, you know. So each of them are entrusted with money, right?
10 talents.
10 talents, that would be measured in gold and silver. An incredible amount of money. This is a lot of money. And he gives it to these 10. And then what happens to him? Now, this is interesting because when we read the parallel, you don't have a lot of this other stuff about going to the foreign country and getting power. Because before he comes back and talks to the servants, which we kind of know, that story, what does Luke tell us as he retells this parable? What goes on with this guy before he comes back to check on his money?
His countrymen hated him, so they sent messengers saying, we don't want him as king.
Okay, the country where he's going to have power, yeah, they don't want him, right? But what ends up happening?
He's king anyway.
Okay, he gets the royal power anyway, so he ends up having authority anyway, and comes back home, right? And what does he do when he gets back home? He goes to the slaves. Now in the other ones, it's only 3.
Yeah.
But here we have 10. Okay? But only 3 are mentioned. You know, only 3 are talked about, right? So he's got his slaves. And what does the first slave say?
He made one from one.
Okay? The first one comes forward and says,
However, 10 here.
you gave me 10 and I made
10.
10. Okay? And what does the nobleman say?
Well done, good slave.
You know, well done. In fact, since I am now in charge of this country over here, I'm going to put you in charge of 10 cities.
Yeah, 10
Okay,
cities.
I'm going to put you in charge of 10 cities. Next slave number 2 comes, and he says,
He has 5.
I've made 5. I've taken your 10 and made 5. And he says what?
You get charged of 5.
Okay, you get charge of 5 cities. Okay, and what about the 3rd slave?
Well, he kept it safe.
Okay, I put it, wrapped it up, buried it in the backyard, right? And why did he do that?
He's afraid of him.
Okay, he's afraid, right? Because
If he would lose any, or, you know, he'd be in big trouble.
yeah, well, he reaps where he doesn't sow, right? You know, this rich person, he's just for, you know, the stars are right for him, right? You know, he prospers even when he doesn't try. He's just lucky, and the slave is scared. What does the noble person say to this one?
Well, he says he's a wicked slave.
Okay, calls him wicked, right? And why is he wicked?
Because he didn't get him any profit.
Okay, that he didn't get profit, and the slave should have recognized that this guy does reap where he doesn't sow. You know, that this guy's
harsh.
Yeah, this guy is harsh. He's strict. And so what does he say to this? What does he tell that one slave?
And he should have at least put it in the bank, and he could have gotten some interest.
Should have put it in the bank and collected interest. So what does he say? Now, what does he say to the with his money? What does he do with his money?
He tells him to give it to the guy who already has
Okay,
10
take
bills.
it and give it to the guy that has 10. Okay, now we have little end to it. What ends up, and then that's it for the servant, right? Now in Matthew, he's thrown out into the dark where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. But Luke doesn't have any of that. What ends up happening at the end of the parable?
Well, he says all those who have more and more will be given.
Okay, for those who have more will be given, and for those who,
Have nothing,
okay.
even what they have will be taken away.
And the ones that didn't want him to be ruler, they were
Yes.
supposed to come and
He goes
bring them
back
and
to
slaughter
that story, the beginning of the parable, right? The people in the country that don't want him to be the ruler, he says,
Bring them to here and
okay,
slaughter them.
bring these people to me, and
Take
going to be slaughtered in my
presence.
presence. Now, what is the action, if you look at it, only the action of the king, this noble, what is his action in the story? What does the noble do in this parable? If we don't focus on the slaves, just focusing on the noble, what does the noble do? What is his actions in this parable?
He's greedy.
Well, he's greedy.
He's
Okay, that's sort of
judging,
his
he's
nature.
Judging.
Okay, that's his sort of his nature. What does he do?
He gives things away that are his.
Okay, first
Power,
he goes
power.
to a far
Cities.
country to become king, right? That's the first thing he does. And gives stuff to the slaves. He gives stuff out. People there where he goes, they protest him, right? He comes back and does what?
Collects on his,
Collects, rewards those who served him, punishes those who
Don't honor him.
don't honor him, that oppose him, right? Now, how might the context influence the meaning? Right after he tells this story,
He heads to Jerusalem.
he's going to Jerusalem. How and what story follows this one right off?
Palm Sunday.
Palm Sunday, him entering Jerusalem. And how does he enter Jerusalem? On a donkey, triumphantly being recognized as, but humbly being recognized as a king. And here we have a story that's been shaped where we have a person being made king, rewarded. How might that shape what's going on in this parable? Now understand, in the other gospel, certainly in Matthew, it's in another place. So you couldn't say that about Matthew because it's not right on to entering Jerusalem. And it doesn't have that stuff about him going to be
How they
a king.
kind
and
of
stuff.
protest him. They don't want him to
well,
be king.
Yeah, we got a lot of parallels, right? Because he's about to enter. You know, he's come from Galilee, right? To Jerusalem. As he enters as king, there are going to be people who are not going to recognize him, right? Are going to protest him. There are also going to be people who are going to, especially in Jerusalem and after, there are going to be people who are going to serve him, right? Now, who are the people that are going to end up serving him?
The disciples.
The disciples are going to end up serving him later. Jesus the King is going to enter Jerusalem. He's going to reward those who serve him, right? Those who don't are going to be punished, right? Harshly here. But we're talking about a parable. And parables we don't take literally. They're going to be punished harshly. How might that reflect at least what Jesus wants his disciples, and Luke wants his church to know about Jesus as who's about to come in as king? What might he want?
I think he wants the disciples to know he expects return on his investment.
That Jesus expects them to what?
Work.
To work, to serve him.
To multiply.
That's right. Not to bury it in the backyard. You know, not to wrap it in a napkin. Now, it's interesting that if those servants are the people in the church, you know, that he doesn't punish like in Matthew. In Luke, he doesn't punish them. You know, in Matthew, they're sent out in the dark, where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. So all the servant who isn't productive, what's the only thing that happens to him? What's the only thing that happens to the slave who's not productive? He has to give back what didn't belong to him in the first place, right? All he does is give back what doesn't belong. So there's no punishment. He just doesn't advance. He doesn't get any more.
So would that be his wholeness, though?
Well, he doesn't fall behind, but he doesn't gain either. He doesn't gain either. He just stays
where he was.
Where
the other
he
ones
was.
Were ruler like king.
That's right. The other one
10 cities
not only gets the money, but they end up getting authority, right? They end up having authority. The one servant continues to be
a servant.
But he's not thrown into the dark. You know, he just continues to. Who ends up being punished? Not the servant that isn't productive. Who gets punished in this story?
The ones that were against
him. The ones who are against him. The ones who reject him as king, who don't want him to be king. They are the ones that are going to be punished. Why is that so important for Luke's church to hear? And in a sense for us to hear. Why is that so important for them to hear?
You know, straighten up or you're going to...
Well, internally, you need to serve. You need to be productive with what you have, what you've been given. But who is putting pressure on Luke's church?
Luke.
Well, who's putting pressure? You got a little church in a little town, right? And that church is dealing with external pressure. You know, who is putting pressure external? And we've run into it over and over.
The Pharisees.
The Pharisees and scribes and Pharisees later. You know, Luke's church is feeling a lot of pressure from those who have rejected Jesus as king, right? Those who rejected Jesus as king. The ones who, when Jesus enters, will tell Jesus to shut the crowd up. the ones who decided to be against him because he's done good. Those are going to be the ones those are the ones who are putting pressure on Luke's church. Not the Romans yet. It's the Jews. They're the ones. And who are going to be punished by the parable? They're the ones that are going to be punished. They're the ones that are going to be punished. Not those on the inside, but those who are attacking from the outside. Okay, at this point, he's really given the disciples all the lessons they need, right? Man, he's even told them about Jesus returning. You know, we talked about that a little. How to pray. He's taught them how to pray. You know, how to receive eternal life. All of this, he's prepared the church that'll come later for life with Jesus gone. Okay? And I think that's how Luke has shaped his gospel. That's what he's doing to shape his gospel. You know, this we have. We got a major shift in chapter 19, verse 28. Because at 19:28, what is Jesus going to do?
What's Jerusalem?
He is going to enter Jerusalem. That's what we're going to look at next week. We're going to look at Jesus entering Jerusalem and what he does in Jerusalem. Because we're coming to the end, right? Okay. Any question about what's going on here?
Just a comment.
Yeah.
I think it would have been kind of interesting if they would have went back to the crowd that grumbled after Zacchaeus says, I'm giving half away, and everybody I swindled gets 4 times. See how many in the crowd would be like, oh, wow. You know, like, well.
You know, and that's interesting because Luke doesn't say that, right?
Yeah.
That's not included
Something
in
know.
that. Why do you think he? And it's hard to say. Why wouldn't you do it? That's like, you know, showing that you didn't do something. That's a hard thing to do. But the fact that that's not there, what might that tell you about Luke's intention? He includes that everybody is grumbling, but he doesn't say that everybody changes their mind when they see what a great guy Zacchaeus is.
You know, I think he probably feels it's not important or whatever.
Well, it's not important, or it certainly doesn't make the point. By including that, doesn't make the point he wants to make.
Yeah.
You know, I think
Zacchaeus
He's trying
changed,
to-
so even though they grumbled, he's still going to do what he said he was.
he's still going to, because he's not doing it because
to gain
of
favor
them.
of them, but
he's
of
doing it
God,
because of him.
Jesus. Yeah.
Right. So Zacchaeus' motivation is there. I think this is Luke setting us up for betrayal. You know, that Jesus is going to face. Jesus is right. He's going to be handed over. And if it's only the scribes and the Pharisees who want to do it, that's going to be hard. But right here we've kind of got that the possibility that it's going to include all. And the fact that he uses all instead of crowds, now it's everybody. You know, it's everybody. Which is kind of interesting. I think we're being set up for the betrayal that's going to occur. Now, he's got some things to do in Jerusalem, and that's what we'll talk about next time. But that's a good. I think that's a real good observation. You know that you know how would the crowd have reacted? What would they thinking? Were they embarrassed? You know, were they?
Well, yeah, like, well, if I'm going to get
Yeah.
that money back.
Yeah. Or were they standing in line saying, "Well, you cheated me"?
Yeah.
You know, you remember when your thugs took more money than you should have. You know, this idea too of being honest. In Luke, if we go all the way back to John the Baptist, remember in Luke when John was preaching, different groups came up to him, and one were soldiers, and the soldiers asked, "What do we need to do?" When John was talking about repentance and confession, the soldiers said, "What do we need to do?" And the Baptist says, "Collect only what you're entitled. Don't use your power to exhort people." So it's interesting that this kind of ethic we see reflected in Zacchaeus too. He is, in a sense, he's doing what John the Baptist challenged his crowds to do. And that may be a connection. That would be kind of a cool way to close that section, to go back to an image that was used earlier. That would be a very interesting structural thing to do. Anything else? Okay, let's have a word of prayer and then go home. Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to look at your word. Remind us that we have the opportunity to see. You've given us sight. Help us to use it. You've also given us certain tools, certain gifts. Help us to use those as well. And help us to recognize something in you that a blind man reminded us that you are truly King. So help us to do that in the name of Christ we pray. Amen.